Welcome to Let's Talk Democracy. I'm Tina Johnson, your host. Join me as we talk to the people on the front lines, the change makers and activists who are building a stronger, healthier democracy for all of us. Whether you're looking for expert advice, a new perspective, or just a little inspiration, this is where you'll find it. Is social media strengthening democracy or quietly tearing it apart? In Season 3, Episode 2, The Megaphone Effect, How Social Media Controls Democracy, we dive into social media's profound impact on democracy, polarization, and public discourse. Digital platforms are reshaping democratic life, not as neutral public squares, but as profit-driven systems designed to amplify outrage over understanding. I'm joined by Lisa Search, professor of the practice of peacebuilding at the University of Notre Dame, Keough School of Global Affairs, director of the Peace Tech and Polarization Lab, and author of Social Media Impacts on Conflicts and Democracy. Together, we explore how social media has become a megaphone for polarization and what it would take to redesign our digital spaces to foster listening, dialogue, and democratic resilience. Let's get into it. Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much for joining me on today's episode. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Tina. It's glad to be with you.
Yeah, so we're in the new year. A lot has happened. And for the Season 3 focus, I really wanted to work a little bit more on understanding the role of social media and technology in democracy. So I want to start off with a sort of a big, broad question, maybe not so broad, but a big question. And it's really focused around where we are in the era of the digital platforms and how they have increasingly begun to mediate the political participation, the public discourse, and access to information, and how people are engaging with one another around these resources or tools. And I wanted to get an understanding of how should we as regular people understand the role of social media and technology and how they're reshaping the very foundation of democratic life.
Those are really important questions. Well, here we are at the beginning of January 2026, and democracy just keeps getting battered. Democratic institutions, but just even the spaces where we can talk freely with each other as we see civic space closing around the world. What I mean by that is governments just really want to be able to control these platforms, and they work hand in hand with companies who are oriented toward profit and propaganda, extremist rhetoric. These are all things that are actually good for the companies. So the more outrageous policy moves that are made by the White House or by other countries around the world, the more that the tech companies actually profit, because it drives all of us to want to figure out what is happening, what do other people believe. But when we go to platforms, whether it's Meta, X, many of the other large social media platforms, what we find is just utter chaos where people on the left and the right are hearing and analyzing things in completely different ways. This is not new to social media, but what social media has done is taken, sort of a megaphone to propagandists, given them a megaphone for sort of being able to shout at any of us what they want us to believe. But then also this unique feature of social media platforms, which is unlike what was happening before technology, is that they are listening to us and they are reading our emotions. They data scrape for the words that we use, the people that we're connected to, and they know how to emotionally manipulate us. And that's done through very high levels of data that they are consuming about all of our behavior online. And so they can give any corporation or any political actor the tools to shape a narrative that will be maybe the most compelling to us, but also it's not necessarily feeding us what we want to hear, because sometimes it just fuels outrage, but it fuels outrage by feeding us content that will keep us online longer. And ultimately, that is the goal of big technology corporations like Meta or Amazon or Netflix. They want to keep us on their platforms as long as possible. That's how they make money. And so it's like my colleague Ravi Iyer at University of Southern California says, it's like having a plate of donuts in front of us at all times. We might not want those donuts. We might want to enter the new year with a healthy diet, but the temptation of extremist sort of invitations to look at outrageous content. It's like this plate of donuts or a plate of French fries before us. And we have to use so much willpower not to just take the bite of something that is ultimately not good for democracy. So let me summarize this. These platforms are built for profit. They're not built as digital public squares. They're not built to support democracy or deliberation or information that can help us make sense of the world. They are like giving us something that our worst instincts invite us to look at. It's like driving by a highway accident and how everybody slows down to take a look at the disaster that's unfolding before us. Now, this is dangerous because what we really need in a moment like this, we really need spaces that help us understand what is happening in our world. What does the Donroe Doctrine mean of the U.S. now having access to the entire hemisphere and claiming it as a right for the U.S. to intervene and take other people's gold and oil and land? We need places where we can actually deliberate this with people from different points of view, with facts, with histories that are accessible and can help inform this conversation. So it's a fact-based deliberation. But that's not what social media gives us. Social media gives us a gladiator arena where we see people in the center of the ring fighting it out with propaganda, with false narratives, with extremist talk from both the left and the right, but it is mostly from the right. But the left often falls prey to sort of getting into the ring and fighting it out. So yeah, we are in dire straits, both with the elected leaders that we have and with the technology platforms that make it so difficult for people to make sense of what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, I think some of the tension or the conflict that exists is the fact that the emotional side that people get kind of hooked in by, because it is a lot of feeling. Blair Talmadge spoke about this in the last season, about how it is so emotional for folks now, and that's where they're sort of entering into the conversation. And
Yes.
then when you have social media algorithms finding that to use for, again, getting you hooked, creates this tension and this blind spot in understanding what actually you're voting for. So when you mentioned the Donroe Doctrine, this was not a part of the platform when Donald Trump was elected president. It actually is contrary to what the MAGA stalwart has said that they wanted. It wasn't an interventionist American policy. It was an American first policy. And yet that emotional pull, drag, however you want to frame it, is what people got hooked into and not looking at Project 2025, which was a huge part of his platform, even though he denied it, that people were so emotionally invested in the surface presentation that they were getting online that they ignored the actual policy bricks and mortar that were being presented there. And so I think this has a lot to do with the fact that the way technology has been set up and designed, as you have shared with us now, leaves the question of how does social media and digital technology, since they are so central to public and political life, how can they be used in a different way that creates inclusion, dialogue, and informed decision making, not just in the US, but on a global scale?
Well, I think we need to design new platforms or we need new systems. And so there are a number of platforms that already exist. We call them deliberative technologies. These are platforms that have been designed to support informed dialogue. So, getting people from across the political spectrum to be able to talk with each other and have access to facts and different sources of news, different points of view on the news. But when you're designing a platform for deliberation, you actually want to invite people to not take the most extremist point of view or amplify the most extreme voices. You want to actually use algorithms that find the areas where people have the most common ground, the most ability to take off on the conversation on a footing that allows people to see the humanity and the experiences that have shaped other people's points of view. And so that's what's really distinct about a deliberative technology. It really invites people to find. Let me back up. I'm a dialogue facilitator. So when I facilitate people in any conversation, we want to start with, why is this issue of importance to you? What are the experiences in your life that have shaped your view on these issues and the passion that you're bringing to this topic? So we need a platform that can ask that question and then help people listen to each other. Now, the major social media platforms are really good at helping people speak to each other. So these are megaphones, basically. So anybody can speak to anybody else. And that's what's new about digital technologies over the last 20 years, is that now anybody on the planet can use a megaphone to speak. But these platforms do not help people listen to each other and really try to understand the humanity, the experiences that have gone into those different points of view. So, a deliberative technology, I'll give you several examples. There's one of the earliest ones was called Polis, POL.is. It's been used now in Finland, UK, Scotland, Taiwan, many other places around the planet. And it has a feature which allows somebody, a facilitator like me, I would ask a question. What are the experiences in your life that have led you to this point of view? And people share short texts of what has influenced them. Other people can agree this experience also reflects my life, or disagree. No, that's a different experience. But you start to see where there's common ground, both in people's experiences, but you also get to see where people are disagreeing. Like, no, I've never had an experience, for example, in a dialogue on immigration. I've never had an experience where an immigrant has been untrustworthy or has been somebody who has committed a crime against me or my family. That's not part of my life experience. I have only experienced immigrants as positive communities of people and families in my life. So that shapes my view on immigration policy and sort of like giving people the space to give the background to not just their view on the policy issue, but the experiences that have shaped them. Then when you enter the next round of a dialogue, you get into, okay, so what are some policy options that, you think would be helpful for immigration? And you get people sort of putting in their ideas, not replying to other people's ideas. They can agree or disagree or pass on what other people have said, but there's no reply button. And just removing that one design feature takes away most of the toxicity. So most of what we see on social media is people are speaking and then replying to each other in very nasty, toxic ways. And it doesn't help people listen to each other or find common ground. The algorithm is actually showing you the most extreme voices because that will be what keeps you on those platforms longer. So even very simple design changes can shift the whole nature of the conversation. And so most of my research is on really trying to identify what are the designed features on technologies that we design specifically as a digital public square where people can listen to each other and make sense of the world around them. What is different about those platforms from what we see currently in social media, which uses algorithms and design features that just inflame and are burning down democracy around the world?
You and I both share a common, we call it occupation. I also am a dialogue facilitator. So what you said resonates with me because bringing people together to actually engage in, I always call it not a consensus of agreement, but a consensus of understanding each other's perspective. Like we don't need to agree, but that we can actually walk out of a room and go, oh, that's a perspective or
Right.
something I didn't know or didn't understand. And I can now put that inside of the way I'm thinking about the world around me or issues around me, because now I have some input that allows me to see this from someone else's experience. And that makes a world of difference when you're trying to have a conversation, right? Not trying to get people to be convinced or persuade them, but just that you can have a conversation where empathy, compassion, sympathy become part of the exchange of ideas. And it just makes me think about what you said a little bit earlier around the profit model of social media companies or technology companies that trade in this social discourse, which is really more about the megaphone than it is about the listening ear versus the democratic values, because it becomes this very convoluted space when you add profits and then a set of values that are meant to be beneficial to everyone. And when social media becomes the megaphone and people use that more often than they use their listening ear, you have this sense, well, not even a sense, it's a reality. There's polarization, misinformation is shared, there's this outrage, as you mentioned. And I'm curious in your work and the way you approach this, why you think that these platforms have made this particular business decision that often undermines democratic values, that closes down the open market of ideas, that ultimately becomes this economic model that becomes more important than the actual lived experiences or the reality of how people are engaging in a very important part of their life, the civic reality of their democratic or their democracy as a whole, especially when you look at the West.
We have to understand the incentive system that currently exists. So, the history of government, and how they govern companies, corporations. I think we have to look at the history of capitalism because capitalism has tried to create the free market where companies can do whatever they want, even if it's extractive of oil or people's attention. So, one, social media is an extractive industry. We have to think of it in terms of the extraction of people's time and attention to a platform where they will be shown ads, and the company running that platform is also extracting not only their attention, but all of the data. Every keystroke they make on their computer goes into the information the company has on each one of us on the entire planet. Basically, anybody who's connected to the internet has a Facebook profile. Even if they don't have a Facebook account, Facebook has information about them, a psychological profile that is based on every keystroke because Facebook is embedded on so many of the platforms that people go to. So you search for something on Google, and next thing you know, you're seeing ads for it on your Facebook feed. This is because these systems are connected. They're not separate information systems. So people need to understand this is an extractive system, not built for democracy or deliberation. And governments are protecting that free market right for corporations to extract our data and to extract our attention. This could be different. Governments could put limits on that extraction. And in China, for example, which we consider to be, not a democracy, but they realize that what this is doing to children is incredibly harmful to the rest of their economy. What's bizarre is Americans have not realized that yet. This is the most bipartisan issue in Congress right now, what social media is doing to youth, because depression, anxiety, suicide, all of these things correlate pretty directly with the rise of social media and with youth being on these platforms. The only way we see any sort of bipartisan action is on what this is doing to youth, because in China, TikTok shows science videos and kids going to school. And the number one rated thing that kids in China want to be is a doctor, a lawyer, a scientist. If you ask kids in the United States what they want to be when they grow up, the number one thing is an influencer. Because on TikTok, people are doing all kinds of money-making activities, which are extracting our attention for dance videos, for makeup videos, for just like crazy stuff. And this is going to shape our economy. This is sort of like, this is terrible for youth not to want to study and sort of do something productive with their lives other than trying to be part of a capitalist system of advertising, which is now sort of the number one industry in the United States, is getting people's attention on social media to be able to show them better ads that will increase their consumer activity. This is what Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard calls the surveillance capitalism attention economy. There are not incentives right now. There's not government incentives and there's not design incentives to switch these big social media platforms over to a deliberative design. So I think we need some alternatives. And partly I think the big tech companies still could make money if they provide people good spaces for worthwhile dialogue and deliberation. And that's part of my hope, is that if we show people that people are craving making sense of the world. And I think that part of the chaos and the elections even that we're seeing is just the collapse of meaning. People can't make sense of all of the crazy stuff in the economy, in the environment, in the political atmosphere. You just sort of like, people are craving meaning making, a place where they can listen to other human beings, understand the experiences in their lives that help them make their political decisions. And you're right, not necessarily agree with them, but at least they walk away from that dialogue understanding the world better. And I think that if the big tech companies realize that people are deeply craving that meaning making and sense making, that they could design their platforms differently. Something like Facebook or X, you can have, these are the two design features I would change. Color code the conversations. When people are talking about their families, make it one color so you know what you're looking at. When people are posting political content that is verified, that is from a solid news source, bipartisan agreement on solid news, make it one color. If people are giving their political opinions on something, make it a different color so that I could look at my feed and know what I'm looking at. Because right now, all that information is mixed together and it's crazy making. People can't distinguish things from each other. So I'd color code things. And secondly, on political commentary, on opinions, I would not offer a reply button. People can share their opinion, they can share their experiences, and people can agree or disagree, but there would be no toxic. If they would just remove the reply button on those kinds of conversations, you would have a higher level of listening rather than just speaking at each other. And if you used an algorithm with that, so actually there's three design things. The third thing would be a different algorithm. When people are talking about their political opinions, use an algorithm that helps people show where they agree and where they disagree. But make sure that the common ground algorithms are visible and more highly valued than where the disagreement is, because what we need most of all right now is to see that there is something holding us together, that we are not completely different animals walking on this planet, but that actually we do have shared values and we do have shared concerns on migration, on the climate, on the economy. I think Americans and people in other countries actually do have far more in common than their disagreements. But we can't see them right now. And so we can't make sense of the world when we can't see where we have agreement.
Yeah, especially if it's the outrage that gets put to the top. That's what most people think that is the universal a feeling or experience or shared belief. And that makes it really problematic when like I use social media very seldom, because of the interaction. It's such a negative interaction. For me, when I read comments, I'm like, why are you saying this? And I refuse to have that. But I do understand that a lot of people are engaged in that. I was just curious to hear if you had any examples of policy or emerging models that give you hope. You've identified 3 things that you would change within the context of Facebook and X, but are there spaces, places that you see, here's some potential good that could be coming in the near future?
Yeah, there are a number of efforts right now to build better systems for communication and using deliberative technologies, these technologies that help people listen at scale and make sense of the world. The design of those platforms, has drawn a lot of attention in some circles. Those of us who study democracy and dialogue and deliberation are pretty excited about the possibility that the design of different platforms would help shift the attention. There are several technological challenges still to be had here because also AI is rising right now, and AI offers us possibilities of listening at scale and having AI summarize large amounts of content. AI also poses this challenge of how are we going to distinguish human beings from bots online? Because as the bots get smarter using AI, they can pretend to be human beings. And so, how do we know when we're talking with an individual or a bot? And this is a major technological challenge right now to develop secure, verified digital identity systems so that anybody participating in an online space would have a clear identity marker on their post that they are a verified human being. The challenge of this is that most of this deliberative technology works best when it's anonymous. So, in a way, you want people to be anonymous because you want the ideas to stand for themselves. And this also actually can take away some of the toxicity when people are just talking about the ideas and not trying to get more likes for their personal ego. Their ideas stand alone, and it doesn't matter what color skin, what age, or what gender somebody is when the idea is posted anonymously. So we need places to be anonymous, but to be verified that it's an actual human being that is speaking. And right now, we don't have great technological options for doing that. Unfortunately, it can also allow governments to surveil people. So this is also it's just a tricky technological thing to figure out who's going to hold the digital verified identity system and how are we going to make sure that governments cannot surveil people based on what they post on these dialogue deliberation forums. So there's some tricks to be had here. But overall, I am hopeful that over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have much better technological digital platforms designed to help people understand each other, listen to each other, and make decisions together about difficult policy issues like the climate, like energy, like migration. These are issues that we need facts at hand to have actually fact-based deliberation and dialogue, and to really weigh pros and cons and all the difficult trade-offs that involved in finding any kind of policy solution. So right now, the big platforms, they're profiting from us versus them frameworks. And this leads to governance deadlock, gridlock, where in Congress, sort of half and half, half the country's one way, half the country's the other, and we can't find any migration solutions, any climate solutions because of this division. So we need platforms that will help us move past that gridlock to be able to weigh the pros and cons, the trade-offs on some of the policy issues. And AI can actually really help with that by giving people very visual markers to help make sense of if we do this for the climate, it will have this impact on the economy. Or if we do this on migration, it will have this various impacts on our economy, and helping people see the trade-offs and see what we're weighing, what the policy options really are. I think some of AI can help us do that actually far better, but only if we can be in these dialogue spaces and know that AI is not manipulating us, is not pretending to be human beings, because I'm afraid actually that's the scenario. And if I could choose a world with AI or without, I would choose the world without AI because I think the dangers of it and the energy consumption of it pose much bigger dangers to humanity than the solutions that it offers. But I just want to sort of lay out for your listeners that there are some pros to AI that we are thinking about how we could use this to perhaps help people.
Yeah, there's an element of what you're saying as well, and it's about the accountability aspect of this
Yeah.
and what that means from the government levels, civil society levels, and then also from the platforms themselves. What would meaningful accountability coming from government, civil society, and these platforms look like?
It's a great question. And we need better metrics to measure what is actually happening online on different platforms in order to get to that sort of regulatory framework. So we already have a polarization footprint put out by a group called Build Up, which is looking at the measuring the polarization impacts of different platforms. In other words, before and after somebody goes to a social media platform, do they believe in a world where it's us versus them and very little nuance, and their enemy is the other, is wrong, is sort of motivated only by bad factors? Or, sort of what is the before and after of people's belief systems about the world and the other side, before and after they spend time on a platform. So that polarization footprint is needed to sort of measure the harmful scope of how harmful a platform is. We also need a set of metrics to measure how positive a platform is in terms of how people can listen and understand each other and see the good intentions in the other side, be able to make sense of the world. So that sense making, meaning making dimension. And then also, how well is the platform helping people, supporting people in actually weighing the pros and cons and making policy decisions that are informed by fact? So there are a whole range of ways that we are looking at measuring what we call social cohesion, which is that sort of positive set of impacts a platform can have, versus polarization, which are the negative impacts. So imagine a scale where it's 0 is sort of the middle, and it can go to -10 or +10. And hopefully we're going to have a set of metrics and digitally embedded sort of indicators to see how a platform is impacting people and societies. Is it having a net negative effect, increasing polarization, or is it having a positive effect? Is that platform helping people understand each other, helping people solve problems and make sense of the world? So I think this is one of the challenge for academics and practitioners is to figure out how to devise this system, because governments need a metric system so that they can know what is happening online. Without those metrics, we can't really penalize or tax or, sort of fine technology companies for creating platforms that are having this negative polarizing impact on society. We also can't reward technology companies who are doing good things. And investors need these signals as well as governments, because investors, some venture capitalists do want to invest in what we call pro-social platforms that improve social cohesion. But all of these companies and governments, they need something to base their decisions on. And so, this is partly where the academy, civil society needs to step up and participate in creating the things that are needed in order to have a better digital information ecosystem.
How would civil society do that?
Yeah, we're already doing it. I mean, I put universities within civil society. So, for several years, Stanford University's Peace Innovation Lab has been looking at these sort of digitally embedded indicators, metrics for pro-social behavior online. They've got some really interesting research on this already. They called it the Hague Peace Data Standard. And on the other side, the negative sides, another civil society group, Build Up, based in the UK and in several countries around the world, they've just put out a polarization footprint based on evaluating platforms in Kenya. And so, this is being innovated by civil society, how we can measure polarization and social cohesion. And so, we're trying to move this forward to give companies and governments and investors some options for measuring what their platforms are doing to society.
It's interesting because I should know better, but I always lump in the individual in civil society, but I know that it's not. So then it leads me to this question of, given the clarity of how powerful these platforms are and holding ordinary people, citizens, sort of in their laser beam, what are ways that individuals could potentially be held accountable or take control back from these platforms other than just logging off, which has been like, get off of social media, take the apps off your cell phones. Most people are not going to do this. So are there other ways in which individuals could actually do more or do something?
It's a good question. I don't have a quick answer on that one. I think, you know, using our civic voice, our individual voice to tell platforms, hey, I don't like your algorithm. I don't like what you're showing me. I want you to create better spaces where I can understand people across the divide. Why not lobby Meta and X and say that, putting it on our feed or writing an email? Or I think that kind of public pressure, it does matter. And we also need to be telling our governments that, hey, I don't like my children using social media. I don't want to use social media. I want you to clean up this space and make it better for our public understanding and our society, because it's one of the many factors that are tearing us apart right now. And as our government leaders, you are responsible for creating an infrastructure in the country that helps the country function. And social media is not helping us function. It's dysfunctional for society.
I think what Australia just did about a month ago, saying children under the age of 16 are all social media, for many people seemed extreme. But what you pointed out earlier, the difference between China showing students going to school and their young people wanting to be doctors, and then the US people wanting to be influencers, and then the rate of suicide,
Yeah.
insecurity, all of these things coming up for young people when they're developing into their own individual selves. It seems like Australia has made the right decision based off of their own research and what they understand the impact of social media is on young people. And I think that the younger generation, the youth, is a very different demographic than older people who, in theory, should be better equipped to understand and to discern information. And that's not always the case. So I think in Australia, there might be a model there for saying there should be a limit. I don't know that it's enough of a limit at 16. I don't have kids, so I'm not going to say kids shouldn't have it because I'm not speaking on that place of motherhood. But it just seems like there is this constant struggle of how much can you say no to something that is available to everyone to have access to because of their age, when in fact the people who are making decisions as far as voting tend to be older and are making really bad decisions. So it's like this one is keeping our young people mentally
Yeah.
safe, but also acknowledging that our adults also need to be mentally safe, but because they're exercising their rights in different ways. Does this tension of how much social media is used or when it's used to undermine or help to underdevelop ideas of thinking and being productive engagers of a society, rather than wanting to be an influencer, wanting to be part of a graduating class of university students? I think part of it's this idea of how much of this control can we take back as ordinary citizens when our identity or the way in which society is being structured now is primarily on social media. Are there ways in which we could be educating young people how to use social media in a more effective way for their own future benefit? So I think that part is missing. Like, no, you can't be on social media, but when you're 16, you can. But what have you learned about how to engage with social media?
I mean, I think that model is based on basically like cigarettes. So it's like saying social media is bad for you. So you have to be an adult if you want to choose to smoke or to use social media. I think that's the wrong way to think about this because I think the problem is there's a lack of choice. We should think of it as food. Going back to the donuts, like, so right now, social media is junk food for the brain. It's junk food for society. It destroys our body, our collective body. But we should have the choice to be able to have platforms that are better for society. And we should be designing food that nourishes us as a society. We should have platforms that nourish our communal understanding of each other, even if we don't agree with each other. It should be helping us have some kind of glue that holds us together. And so I think the problem with the Australia version, I think the good thing about it is that it signals this is dangerous, like making cigarettes illegal for kids. It signals this is not good for your health, and you have to be an adult to choose to do this bad behavior. So it signals to everybody, hey, this stuff is dangerous. This is not kids' play. Facebook is toxic. So if you want to put toxin in your body, you have to be an adult. So that's a good signal. But I think what we need more of is sort of this comparison of, you know, companies that are putting out platforms that are toxic need to be taxed like cigarettes are taxed, taxed like junk food should be taxed. And the incentives that a government creates for a society is we should be creating platforms that help people, that are nutritious for our body, our collective body. And my worry about just banning platforms and not taxing them on their toxicity is where is the incentive? Where is the investment in good platforms? Because ultimately, governments have to shift the economy so that there are incentives in place for companies to design platforms that improve the health of the collective body of society. And until we have those choices, people are going to keep going to the junk food. And so, yeah, I'm some of us, these small efforts to create healthy food for society, healthy platforms, they don't have enough government support. In Europe, they do. This is quite the difference. In European countries, governments are investing in dialogue platforms, in deliberation platforms to help cities come up with better policies that more of their citizens agree with. That's the model that the rest of the world should be following, not just banning certain sites for kids, but saying, oh, we have options, we have choices, and we need a marketplace of platforms where people can use their clicks on their screen as their feet as they would in going to stores that sell good products versus stores that sell bad products. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I do think point that you made earlier around regulation, it seems like by banning it, you're avoiding having to regulate by saying we're just going to push it to the side until you're 18 and then we don't have to be responsible. It's cowardly. It's an avoidance tactic instead of saying we are going to take action, like on climate change. We'll just wait. We don't have to worry about it right now. And that is something that's not helpful because at the end of the day, if we're not finding ways to regulate something that is bad food, it's socially detrimental to all of us, then we're pushing the responsibility further and further away when regulation could actually have a very impactful outcome for society. And I think that that is something that I do find interesting around most political and policy issues is how little political will there is to actually do the heavy lifting of saying we will regulate an industry that we realize is being harmful and needs to be reined in to be in more alignment with the way in which society should be able to function. And that's, I think, a universal issue. And Europe does do a better job of holding these platforms more accountable. It still has lots of work to do, but it's doing something that then the US in particular is unwilling to do. And it makes me think about how the deliberative process that you talked about as being a platform that could be used. could potentially be a hybrid process, because I do think part of it, the social media arena, is that it's online still, and there's still potential for a
Oh,
disconnect between
definitely.
communities. But
Right.
could there be a hybrid process,
So
deliberative online spaces as well as in-person exchanges and ideas and community building?
absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're trying to build is overall a more active democracy which has more spaces that are in person because people are lonely and they're anxious and people really need spaces in society, to be able to talk with the facilitator with people who are different from them because I think people are craving that. So there are, a variety. We in the US, we're calling this the bridging movement. They're creating spaces, in-person spaces across the country for people to talk with each other across the lines of politics or division. And so our argument is not to replace that or to to limit that. That needs to continue to grow, the bridging space of creating places where people can talk with their neighbors and people in their community. And what the online space can do is just make it more accessible for more people at a larger scale so that people who can't leave their house or who don't have time to go to the library every Saturday afternoon for a dialogue, that they have some opportunities to have their voices heard and to express themselves and to listen to other people. And really sort of, thinking of these as listening spaces, as sense making places, rather than as voices to speak, which is how the big social media platforms operate. So it's really that dialogue focus on helping people listen and understand.
I appreciate that. I know from my own experience the power of being in the room with other people and just listening, which is huge, and walking out of a space not enraged, but contemplative or reflective about what I've heard.
Mm.
And I think that that is, I'm hoping that that is a space where many people are moving towards and getting away from the enraged feeling because it's exhausting and it's unsustainable into a more contemplative, reflective space where hearing someone else's thoughts and ideas, it's soothing and it allows you to have this calmness about the spaces that you're in versus feeling that you're always on the defense or that you need to defend something or someone just because it's the environment that's been created. It's like we're all at war and yet we don't know what we're fighting for, right? Like it's this emotional, psychological warfare. And so I wanted to ask you, looking ahead, are you more optimistic or concerned about the future of democracy in the digital world? And what gives you the strongest reason for that view?
I think there are both reasons to be hopeful and reasons to be very, very scared. I think the scary future looms larger in my own mind because governments have turned to autocracy, to limiting public spaces and not interested in hearing what the public says. And certainly they have given tech companies here in the United States free rein to do whatever they want. And without restrictions on AI, it is going to environmentally destroy the planet and it will also create just absurdity in nobody knowing what is real and what is fake. It's going to increase the amount of anxiety and inability to make meaning of the world. So unfortunately, I think that the forces of that world are bigger. But as I noted earlier, there are reasons to hope that AI could be used in small ways to support public sense making if we have verified digital identities that can separate bots from human beings. And we can have platforms that really allow people to listen to each other and make sense of what other people believe and think. We could see a turning of democracy to something better. And, I'm working for that second vision, the hopeful vision. I'm hoping adding my life and my energy to trying to make that a reality.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I
Yep.
enjoyed this conversation with you today.
Thanks so much, Tina. It was great to be with you, and you had great thoughts and questions.
This conversation reminds us that the challenges facing democracy in the digital age are not accidental. They are designed, but that also means they can be redesigned. If we want healthier democratic systems, we need platforms that help us listen, understand, and deliberate, not just react. And that work belongs to all of us: governments, companies, civil society, and everyday citizens. By fostering digital spaces that prioritize listening, understanding, and informed dialogue, we can strengthen democratic participation and civic life. If this conversation resonated with you, I invite you to share this episode, spark a discussion in your community, and reflect on how you engage with social media in your own life. Leave a review to help others discover the podcast and join the conversation. Subscribe to Let's Talk Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite platform to stay updated, and continue exploring the ideas, challenges, and people shaping the future of democratic life. I also love to hear from you. Send your questions, comments, or feedback to tina@patternchangelab.com. Your voice helps guide the conversation and strengthen our community of engaged listeners. Talk with you soon.